How VNet communicate between Azure resources. There are three key mechanisms through which Azure resource can communicate. Number one is VNets, number two is VNet service endpoints, and number three is VNet peering. How you filter network traffic. You can filter network traffic between subnets using any combination of network security groups and network virtual appliance like firewall, gateways, proxies, and network address translation services. How resources in VNet communicate with Internet. All resources in a VNet can communicate outbound to the Internet by default. You can communicate inbound to a resource by assigning a public IP address or a public load balancer. You can also use public IP or public load balancer to manage your outbound connection. How to enable VNet to communicate with on-premises resources. You can connect your on-premises computers and networks to a virtual network using any of the following options. Number one, point-to-site virtual private network established between a virtual network and a single computer in your network. Each computer that wants to establish connectivity with a virtual network must configure its connection. The communication between your computer and a virtual network is sent through an encrypted tunnel over the internet. Number two, site-to-site VPN. Established between your on-premises VPN device and Azure VPN gateway that is deployed in a virtual network. This connection type enables any on-premises resources that you authorize to access a virtual network. The communication between your on-premises VPN device and an Azure VPN gateway is sent through an encrypted tunnel over the internet. Number three, Azure ExpressRoute. Established between your network and Azure through an ExpressRoute partner. This connection is private. Traffic does not go over the internet. How many VNet can be created in Azure? Virtual network in Azure is free of charge. Every subscription can create up to 50 virtual networks across all regions. Can a VM have two different IPs? If VM have multiple NIC, you can assign multiple IP to each NIC. How many peering can a VNet have? You can keep up to 500 VNets with one VNet. What are the types of virtual network gateway? The two gateway types are VPN. To send encrypted traffic across the public internet, you use the gateway type VPN. This type of gateway is also referred to as a VPN gateway. Number two is ExpressRoute. To send network traffic on a private connection, you use the gateway type ExpressRoute. Is VNet peering traffic encrypted? Yes, when Azure traffic moves between data center outside physical boundaries not controlled by Microsoft or on behalf of Microsoft, MACsec data link layer encryption is utilized on the underlying network hardware. This is applicable to VNet peering traffic. Can an on-premises device IP address that is connected through Azure VPN or ExpressRoute gateway access Azure PaaS service over VNet service endpoints? By default, Azure service resources secured to virtual networks are not reachable from on-premises network. If you want to allow traffic from on-premises, you must allow public, typically NATed IP address from your on-premises or ExpressRoute. These IP address can be added through the IP firewall configuration for the Azure service resources. How Azure select best path for routing. Azure select a route based on the destination IP address using the longest prefix match algorithm. How Azure select path if multiple routes contain same address prefix. Azure select the route type based on the following priority: user-defined routes, BGP routes, and system route. What is service tag in Azure? A service tag represents a group of IP address prefixes from a given Azure services. Can we create our own service tag in Azure? You can't create your own service tag nor specify which IP addresses are included within a tag. Does the service endpoint route always take precedence? Service endpoints add a system route which take precedence over BGP routes and provides optimum routing for the service endpoint traffic. Service endpoints always take service traffic directly from your virtual network to the service on the Microsoft Azure backbone network. Can I revert the migration after resources have been committed to Resource Manager? You can cancel the migration as long as resources are still in the prepared state. Rolling back to the previous deployment model isn't supported after resources have been successfully migrated through the commit operation. How to override default route created by Azure? You can use below method to override default route. Route tables. You can create custom route table with route that control where traffic is routed to each fault subnet. And BGP, you can connect your virtual network to your on-premises network using an Azure VPN gateway or ExpressRoute connection. You can propagate your on-premises BGP routes to your virtual networks. How can I filter outbound traffic from a virtual network to Azure services and still use service endpoints? If you want to inspect or filter the traffic destined to an Azure service from a virtual network, you can deploy a network virtual appliance within the virtual network. You can then apply service endpoints to the subnet where the network virtual appliance is deployed and secure Azure service resources only to the subnet through VNet ACLs. What happens to the source IP address of a resource like a VM in a subnet that has VNet service endpoints enabled? When virtual network service endpoints are enabled, the source IP address of the resource in your virtual network's subnet switches from using public IPv4 address to the Azure Virtual Network Private IP address for traffic to Azure service. Note this can cause specific IP firewalls that are set to public IPv4 address earlier on the Azure services to fail. What is the use of NVA? An NVA is typically used to control the flow of traffic between network segments classified with different security levels. For example, between a DMZ virtual network and the public internet. Can public IP be static? Public IP addresses are created with an IPv4 or IPv6 address, which can be either static or dynamic. Explain difference between dynamic and static public IP address. A dynamic public IP address is an assigned address that can change over the lifespan of the Azure resource. The dynamic IP address is allocated when you create or start a VM. The IP address is released when you stop or delete the VM. In each Azure region, public IP addresses are assigned from a unique pool of addresses. The default allocation method is dynamic. A static public IP address is an assigned address that will not change over the lifespan of the Azure resource. To ensure that the IP address for the resource remain the same, set the allocation method explicitly to static. In this case, an IP address is assigned immediately. It is released only when you delete the resource or change the IP allocation method to dynamic. How does ExpressRoute work in Azure? ExpressRoute extends your on-premises network to the Microsoft Cloud over a private connection with the help of connectivity provider. ExpressRoute connection don't route through the public internet, providing users with more reliability, faster speeds, consistent latency, and higher security. What OSI layer is ExpressRoute? Layer 3. What is ExpressRoute Fast Path? ExpressRoute Fast Path improves the data path performance between your on-premises network and your virtual network. When enabled, Fast Path send network traffic directly to the virtual machine in the virtual network, bypassing the ExpressRoute gateway. What are the three ExpressRoute connectivity models? Below are the three ExpressRoute connectivity models. By using any of them, you can create a connection between your on-premises network and the Microsoft Cloud. Number one is Cloud Exchange Colocation. Number 2 is point-to-point Ethernet connection. And number 3 is any-to-any IP VPN connection. What is the difference between ExpressRoute and ExpressRoute Direct? ExpressRoute uses a service provider to enable fast onboarding and connectivity into existing infrastructure. It integrates with hundreds of providers including Ethernet and MPLS, whereas ExpressRoute Direct gives you the ability to connect directly into the Microsoft Global Network at peering location strategically distributed around the world. ExpressRoute Direct provides dual 100 Gbps or 10 Gbps connectivity that supports active-active connectivity at scale. You can work with any service provider to set up ExpressRoute Direct. There are certain key capabilities that exist only with ExpressRoute Direct circuits. How do I check ExpressRoute bandwidth? Use ExpressRoute metrics to check ExpressRoute bandwidth. To view metrics, go to the Azure monitor page and select metrics. How do I increase my ExpressRoute bandwidth? If the ExpressRoute Direct doesn't have sufficient capacity, you have two options. Number one, you can either delete circuits that are associated to the ExpressRoute Direct resource that you no longer need. Number two, create a new ExpressRoute Direct resource. What is the minimum number of ExpressRoute circuit required? Minimum 2 ExpressRoute circuits required. What is Azure public peering? Public peering is a unidirectional service using which connectivity is always initiated from your WAN to Microsoft Azure services. Microsoft Azure services will not be able to initiate connections into your network through this routing domain. Once public peering is enabled, you can connect to all Azure services. What is P1 and P2 in Azure? P1 and P2 both are premium license in Azure. If you have an application running on the on-premises server and Azure East US region has a backup, will you be able to access the application via the Azure environment in case of an on-premise server's application access failure? Yes, one can access the application by using the Site Recovery service by Azure. It is capable of handling failover and failback scenario between on-premises server and Azure environments. In case the front-end hosting of an application is done on Azure, if the user needs the database hosting to be done on on-premise server, today's security concern, how will you handle the Azure connectivity? There are few possibilities to resolve this. Azure VNet based point-to-site service can be used to connect one on-premises database to an Azure hosted application. This is valid where there are limited resources to be connected via VPN. In case of more resources for connection, site-to-site or ExpressRoute are the solution. Site-to-site might cause network latency as the VPN works only via public infrastructure, which is the internet. In that case, ExpressRoute can be used as it has a dedicated leased line that solves latency issue. In case VNet is not preferred, Windows Communication Foundation WCF service can be developed and hosted on premises. Your company has an office in Seattle. You have an Azure subscription that contains a virtual network named VNet 1. You create a site-to-site VPN between the Seattle office and VNet 1. VNet 1 contains the subnet shown in the following table. You need to route all internet bound traffic from subnet 1 to the Seattle office. What should you create? A route for subnet 1 that uses the virtual network gateway as the next hop should be created. When a subnet is created, Azure creates a default route to the 0.0.0.0/0 address prefix with the internet next hop type. We need to create a custom route in Azure to use the virtual network gateway in the Seattle office as the next hop.